Hi there everyone, my name is Zach and welcome to my channel. Amongst other things, I'm a reenactor and a jouster. And over on Patreon, we've just had a vote to see what my next few topics should be. And the one that came out on top was a brief history of mounted spear combat. So we're going to go through that now and just have a look at how spear use developed over the thousands of years of mounted combat in Europe. Now I'm going to focus mainly on Europe because that is what I know about. If you have some information about how the spear was used in different cultures around the world, specifically to do with mounted combat, then please do leave a comment down below. Let me know so that I can broaden my understanding and hopefully share some more with the other guys on this channel. Obviously, this is going to be broad strokes. It's just going to go through main beat, and there are exceptions to all of this. So, cavalry in the ancient world was initially, it was using chariots, and chariots were often used kind of to deliver troops to battle. So if you're talking about combat troops, the chariot would drive up, deliver their elite troops into combat, and then would be there to pull them away if the need arose. So we're talking about kind of dragoon warfare, if we can call it that. We also see light chariots being used with bows, but spears aren't really used when on a chariot. You generally can't drive a chariot too close to an opponent. It just doesn't work particularly well. They have quite a large turning circle, and so once people started riding horses instead of using the horses to pull around the chariot, the horses become a lot more maneuverable and you can do a lot more with them. So in the ancient cavalry, where we see people actually riding horses, we have two different types of cavalrymen, and in fact this kind of goes throughout all of history, really. We have the light cavalry and the heavy cavalry. Light cavalry, we see the ancient Greeks using it and the ancient Romans for sure. They use their light cavalry to harry the flanks of the opponents, to scout out where the enemy armies are. And generally, light cavalry is armed with light spears. These spears are basically javelins used for throwing and then retreating. And in Xenophon, we do see Xenophon suggesting that if you're training as a cavalryman, then you should use some blunted javelins and get a friend who is also a cavalryman, and you should practice throwing your javelins at each other. The javelins are probably a bit shorter than these. Really, you just need the wood on the back to help you give weight to it in the throw. We know that they would be a lot shorter than these because Xenophon actually suggests that you use the javelin to help you mount the horse. So you stick the end in the ground and then you put your foot up on the butt of the javelin, and that helps you to mount. Now the reason for needing to use the javelin like that is that we don't have stirrups. In fact, we don't even have saddles at this point. So the other type of cavalry, heavy cavalry, are very much looking like pikemen. And so they're using much longer spears, again, longer than this one. So this one isn't really representative at all of an ancient cavalry weapon. It's very likely that they would actually use two hands in order to carry it. That would still allow them to use the reins if need be. But it's unlikely at this stage that we're actually using the horses full speed into charges. In fact, for a lot of history, heavy cavalry in particular don't generally go into canter, and definitely not a gallop when they're charging. It's generally not needed until we get to the age of plate armor, where you need as much power as possible on the tip of your spear. Moving on from the ancient world, well, the ancient Romans also used light cavalry generally rather than heavy cavalry, using auxiliary units to supplement their professional legions. And there again, generally using lighter spears and throwing them as javelins. We move on, and in the early medieval periods, or post-Roman period, there's not a lot of cavalry use in Western Europe. We do start seeing it. The early Normans are using heavier heavier horses and heavier cavalry, and that's where we start to see the Norman knights. But in the beginning, Norman knights are generally using an overhand grip on their spears. We see javelins being used and longer, heavier spears being used with an overhand grip. This is because they're generally fighting against shield walls, and the tactic is for the Norman knights to ride up to the shield wall, turn the horse to the right, and therefore they're presenting their large kite shield to their opponents, and then they strike down over the heads of their opponents, over the shield wall of their opponents, into the head and the eyes. So we're not quite seeing the heavy cavalry charges being used quite so much there. We do see them in the later Norman period. We see couch lances. We see a mixture of this in the Bayeux Tapestry, the overhead strikes and a light couch like this. Generally, if you are against lightly armored opponents, that a spear will penetrate their armor easily, you generally don't need much more than this kind of a couch. And in later military manuscripts, we see these light couches being used because if the spear goes deeply into an opponent due to the force of the blow, you want to be able to let it go quickly to avoid being pulled off your horse by the weight of your opponent. We also know from later manuscripts, later documents, that generally the way that you dislodge an opponent from the end of your spear is to allow your horse to ride past and let the spear fall with the weight of the opponent on it, and let the weight of the body drag the body off the end of the spear. So a light couch like this, if your opponent is unarmored or lightly armored, will work very well for that. Now, that is less possible as more people are wearing armor and armor gets heavier. By heavier, I mean more effective. We find that this kind of a couch doesn't work. The armor stops the point from going into the opponent, and it just rocks your arm back like this, not doing any real damage to your opponent. Incidentally, that's why many theatrical jousters use this kind of a grip, because it allows the spear to go back without dealing too much damage to your opponent if you catch them on the shield or on the armor. So therefore, we need to couch a lot stronger. Now, as I've just mentioned, the heavier armor needs to be penetrated, but couching it into your arm like this gives you more strength. It means that the lance is less likely to go backwards on impact, giving more of the horse's speed and strength into the blow. But it does also mean that if the lance goes into your opponent, then you are in more trouble, as it were, of maybe losing the lance fully, or being vaulted off of your horse, maybe sideways out of the saddle. It's once we start seeing this couch being used more commonly, we see the saddles creep up the back and start to wrap around the thighs of the knights. It will allow more strength to go into the blow, but it will also stop them from being vaulted out of the saddle with the force of the blow going through the shoulder with this stronger couch. Now, at this point, we're still really talking about mostly mail armor, but the mail is extremely effective, and it's beginning to be supplemented with plates in the form of coater plates and things like that. At this point, the spears and lances are struggling to get through the plate armor, and as the plate armor develops, it gets even harder. And so the armor and the lance needs to be developed. It's around this time that we start seeing the tapered lances being used. Now, this one should be longer. In fact, both of these should be a lot longer for most of the medieval period. You can see here that this lance is wider, especially down by the grip here. and it will taper down and get thinner towards the end. That is so that once it impacts and hopefully goes in, if it breaks, it will break out towards the end rather than down by the grip here. We also see these swellings. These are to give something to hold on to and to hopefully stop the lance from being rocked back, giving more of the horse's strength into the blow. And in this case, it does offer some danger to the person holding it as well. If your couch isn't strong enough in the shoulder, then you run the risk of breaking your thumb with this being pushed back into the thumb. Therefore, having a lighter grip in the hand and a tighter grip around the butt of the lance here is generally better. The lighter grip means that if your lance gets pushed back through, you're not damaging your thumb with that. However, these are generally not used just by themselves. If you look really carefully at manuscript images, you generally see there is an extra ring placed around the butt of the lance around about here. Now, for my style of jousting that I used to do until very recently, we didn't tend to use these because it's called the arrêt de lance, or the lance stop, and this would mesh with the lance rest, or the arrêt de cuirasse, the cuirasse stop, to basically stop the lance from going any further back than where the lance rest is. What that means is you're no longer using the strength of your arm or the strength of your hand to deliver the blow. You're instead using the strength of your entire torso, which of course is attached to the horse, riding on the horse underneath. So most of the strength of the horse is now going down the length of the lance into the opponent. At this point, we're really seeing the lance is at its apex. It can go through a lot of battlefield plate armor. It's not a surefire thing, but it is possible. We know that definitely happened at Bosworth. Richard III managed to kill his first target using a lance which went straight through the cuirass, which is probably the strongest part of a knight's armor. And he would probably be using an arrêt de cuirasse and an arrêt de lance in order to do that. We do see lances being used after this, but generally they tend to get smaller again as firearms become more popular and armor becomes even thicker than it used to be. Using a lance to penetrate armor is less of a good idea. Generally, guns are used to try and penetrate armor, and we start going back to lighter lances, where regiments of lancers are now used as light cavalry, basically, against enemies with little to no armor. One of the benefits, an interesting one that I hadn't really thought of when it comes to the light lance, is that they were often used to help escort enemy prisoners. Because if someone in a column of prisoners was to try and escape, if you were to chase after them with a sword, you have to get very close and risk being pulled from your horse in order to try and stop them. And in fact, if you chase after them and try and attack them, they could easily just drop to the ground and be out of your reach. Whereas with a lance, you can actually reach all the way to the ground, even with even if you're riding a particularly tall horse. So lances are still used all the way into the Napoleonic period, and later. In fact, the British Army got rid of their lancers and then brought them back after the Battle of Waterloo. But they're very much using the light couch in order to deliver a blow and give them a lot more freedom. They're not needing to do the strong couch. They're not needing the arrêt de cuirasse because most of their opponents are more lightly armored, and the only enemy that really really might need a blow that strong. Generally, a lance is going to struggle to go through their armor anyway, because at this point they're proofing against muskets, not just lances. There we go. That was thousands of years of history in a very short video. Obviously, I've skimmed over a lot of it. If you'd like to see more, do leave a comment down below. If you've got any questions or anything you want me to go into more detail on, then please leave a comment down below. Like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to have a say in what videos I do next, you can find out the link to my Patreon in the description down below. Thank you very much, guys, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye-bye.